Oh, hello there. Yes, you. Come on in. You've caught us just in time for our tea time talk. We're here with Saren, Sophie, and me, Dina, and today we're going to be arguing that the Beaux-Arts architectural design of the Legislature building was intentionally chosen to project authority, stability, and British American identity in a new province seeking legitimacy and status in the early 20th century. Am I right, guys?
Right.
Yes.
Dina, okay, wrap up the accent.
Oh, fine. You guys are boring.
Anyways, guys, let's just jump back in. So the Provincial Archives of Alberta helped us understand how the legislators' opening was presented to the public. According to their records, the building was officially opened on September 3rd, 1912 by the Governor General, the Duke of Connaught. That's all good.
That's a hard name to pronounce. Also, during the ceremony, he actually praised Alberta's remarkable progress. That wasn't just a compliment, that was the political messaging. They wanted people to see the legislature as proof that Alberta was modern, successful, and legitimate.
Also, the archives highlight the Beaux-Arts design and the price tag, more than $2 million. That's a massive amount at a time. You don't spend that much money unless you're trying to make a statement.
Plus, the location matters. The legislature was built on the former site of Fort Edmonton, as noted by the archives, and that is symbolic, since it replaced a fur trade post with this huge government building. It is almost like they were saying, we're not a frontier anymore, we are a province with power.
And the pictures from the archives help prove that. You see the massive dome, the classical columns, the symmetry, all of those Beaux-Arts features that connect it to a government buildings in Britain and the US.
One of the descriptions even call it a magnificent sandstone palace, and honestly, that's exactly how it functioned, a visual announcement of wealth, authority, and preeminence.
I think you meant permanence, Dina, but it's all good. Overall, the source supports our argument perfectly. The opening ceremony, the Governor General's speech, the location, the design, everything shows Alberta was using architecture to project identity. They weren't just building a government building, they were building legitimacy. So before we even get into Alberta specifically, we wanted to understand why the government spends so much time and money on massive fancy buildings. Like what could be generally the reason? Right, Serene?
Exactly, it really makes you wonder. But luckily, this is where Nigel Roberts' article, Grand Design, Parliamentary Architecture, Art and Accessibility, that's a long one, was super useful. Nigel explains that parliamentary buildings are way more than just buildings or offices. He says that they are national symbols.
Yeah, when you read into his research, it literally shows that architecture shapes how humans see a country. Robert even proved that through a statistical test that the Palace of Westminster in London, the Capitol building in Washington, the Parliament building in Ottawa, and the oldest surviving parliament in the world, Althingi in Iceland, are all noticed as physical symbols of their nations. That's quite a test he did. So, Serene, what you're saying is when you look at these buildings, you basically see the country, and the architecture communicates identity, power, and democracy without anyone even having to say a word?
Honestly, yeah, because if you think about it, this is why it mattered so much to Alberta. Because look, when they built the legislature, they weren't just creating an office for politicians just because. No! When this building was created, they had a symbol of authority in mind. Something that would make people see Alberta as real, stable province.
It is. Well then, when we speak about the Alberta legislature and all this Beaux-Art symbolism, we also have to talk about who Alberta was constructing this image for.
Sarah Carter's book spoke about this, no?
Yes, Sarah Carter's book about imperial plots highlighted this, and it became very important.
So from her book, it was shown how Alberta was shaping itself as very British, very white colonial province during the exact same years the legislature was being built. She said herself that British women were to be exemplars of an idealized white femininity, not toiling in the fields. In Canada, heated debates about women farmers touched on issues of ethnicity, race, gender, class, and nation.
So even just farming, like owning land, was radicalized and political? Wow. So the British women were welcomed as homesteaders, ranchers, and landowners. Meanwhile, indigenous people faced discrimination and cultural barriers even though it was their land. And when you think about it, those British women were still limited by the patriarchy, as they could farm but could not get the same power and privilege as a man.
Exactly, Carter says it this way: Imperial plots depicts the female farmers and ranchers of the prairies, from the indigenous women agriculturalists of the plains to the array of women who resolved to work on the land and in the first decades of the 20th century.
And remember, the legislature was being built at that exact time, guys, between 1907 and 1913. So that British colonial mindset was literally shaping Alberta society and its architecture.
Then this makes more sense as to why it was Beaux-Arts that was used, right? Alberta wanted to visually look British, respectful, civilized, and powerful even while indigenous peoples were being pushed out of the picture.
Right? This sucks.
Really sucks. So, what about the design of the building?
Well, when we look into the architectural inspiration behind the Legislature, one of the clearest sources was a piece of fly EIA called The Design of Alberta's Legislature Building. It explains that the whole building was created from the mold of the Westminster parliamentary system.
Ah, bingo, because the Westminster system is a British parliamentary tradition. So this would mean that Alberta was basically saying we follow British authority and stability. And again, proves that the architecture wasn't random. It was a statement about identity.
That same source also notes that the Legislature is a revival of Imperial Roman architecture. The neoclassical Beaux-Arts design of the Legislature building is consistent with early 20th century North American architecture.
So Alberta wasn't just using Britain American identity, they were pulling from the ancient Rome.
Yeah, and to back that up, the architectural design article, Roman Architecture Everything You Need to Know, by Mick Laughlin, if I'm saying that correctly, tells us how imperial Roman buildings were designed to show strength and status. Those huge domes, the arches, the marbles, all that was meant to visually communicate power.
Then, when Alberta used that same neoclassical style, they looked at the symmetry, the domes, the pillars, and then decided to borrow that kind of visual language from the empire. They also wanted people to walk up the building and immediately feel that sense of authority and prestige, which is exactly what we felt when we walked into the Legislature building ourselves.
It's literally just Alberta saying, hey, we might be a new province, but our goal is to look like the great powers of the world. Another interesting thing we found is where the Legislature was actually built. According to the Provincial Archives of Alberta, the chosen site was next to the remains of the old Fort Edmonton. On land, it was purchased for $4,000 an acre from the Hudson's Bay Company.
And that detail really matters. The Hudson's Bay Company was a major symbol of British economic control in Western Canada. So choosing that land placed the new Legislature literally on top of British colonial history. It created symbolic continuity, Alberta looking like a British province with British power and identity.
Guys, but there's another twist. The architect of the building wasn't Canadian or British. He was American, and at first the people in Alberta were not happy about it. The archives explain his American origins caused nothing short of an uproar in the young province, but the simplified Beaux-Arts style, strongly influenced by American legislative buildings, dominated the landscape.
So Albertans wanted a building that looked legitimate and politically respectable, and the Beaux-Arts style delivered that because it was already used as an American Capitol building and European government architecture.
Right, the Legislature was copying the visual language of powerful governments. High-end materials and elements were present to represent prestige.
Also, guys, when the building opened, Alberta doubled down on that symbolism. The Governor General himself, the Duke of Connaught, came for the ceremony. The archives say the Governor General, the Duke of Connaught, read a speech celebrating the province's remarkable progress. He says, far beyond even the most sanguine expectations. And before you guys ask, yes, it was him that said that. Far beyond even the most sanguine expectations. Sorry, guys, I'm not a duke. I'm not a duke.
It's okay. He was a representative of the British Crown. His presence turned the building into more than stone. It became a public declaration of Alberta's loyalty to the Empire.
So, between the British-owned land, American-style architecture, and the British royal representative opening the building, Alberta was saying, we belong to a world of modern, powerful governments.
Exactly. The Legislature wasn't just a building. It was an announcement of power, realness, and status.
So another source we looked at was the Edmonton Historical Board, which explains how the Legislature fits into a much bigger architectural trend in early 20th century of Canada. They write that the Legislature was constructed in a classical revival style, which was extremely popular for the government buildings in Canada during the early 20th century.
And it wasn't just Alberta doing this. Manitoba and Saskatchewan used the same approach. The source points out other Canadian examples from the time include the Manitoba Legislative Building and the Saskatchewan Legislature. So all these provinces were basically trying to visually prove that they were stable and modern.
But here's the interesting part. These Canadian buildings weren't original. They were borrowing from American Capitol buildings, which were themselves copying ancient imperial architecture. The Historical Board explains, erected in the classical revival style, the Legislature was strongly influenced by similar American buildings utilizing classic Greek, Roman, and Egyptian elements that suggest power, permanence, and tradition.
So when they claimed that it was American Britain identity, it was actually stolen from the ethnic countries like Rome, Greek, and Egypt. But white power and colonialism silenced that fact and claimed it as American and Britain.
Really typical.
Really typical.
Right? And the materials reinforce that message. The buildings use expensive stone. The first floor is faced with Vancouver Island granite, and the upper floors feature sandstone from the Glenbow Quarry in Calgary.
And using granite and sandstone makes the building look permanent and expensive, something that's meant to impress and even intimidate. It signals wealth and confidence.
Especially as a new province trying to prove it belonged among modern governments.
Another really important source we used was Harold Kelman's History of Canadian Architecture. His work basically explains why Alberta chose the Beaux-Arts style in the first place. Kelman makes it clear that it wasn't random design, it was the dominant architectural language of the power in early 20th century of Canada.
Harold says by the First World War, an architectural manner derived from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris dominated Canada's public architecture.
Yeah, there were even examples that were found outside the legislative bounds. Calman says, the Canadian Northern and Grand Trunk Pacific's Union Station in Winnipeg, 1908 to 1911, brought upon the American Beaux-Arts classicism, the new public style of the day.
So you're saying that many other things were built with this idea like train stations, stores, etc.?
You got it, sir.
To bring this back to our research argument, the way it ties is that when Kelman puts together the prairie legislators to American state capitals, he says the buildings have a lot in common.
Oh my god, kind of like the earlier when we were saying how the architect was American and it was the influence of other American legislators?
Yeah.
Well, now every time I look at the legislature, I will know that that dome isn't just for decoration and had a political message that was copying an earlier style that already portrayed that powerful government meaning. So every design, if you kind of think about it, is tied to one another through generations.
Yeah, and when we researched more Kalman, he pushed this for even further when he wrote that the relentless classical vocabulary and the monumental domes of the two buildings owed their concept to the U.S. Capitol in Washington and its many derivatives in the States. So Alberta was making copies of American capitals to show stability and authority, as stated in our argument, of course.
And that's why I think the legislature was a propaganda of Alberta being a new province and trying to prove it belonged. By adopting the Beaux-Arts design was a way for them to show that they were a modern and stable looking like real governments. You guys also remember Lawrence Vail's architecture, power, and national identity? It was the theory Vail said that tied everything together. He argued that government buildings are and will always be political and will never remain neutral.
Yeah, he said that architecture and the urban design have both been manipulated in the service of politics, and the government buildings are there to build the government itself and support specific regimes. This proved that Alberta legislature was a political performance.
Vail even said that these government buildings are seen and serve as symbols of the state. Guys, this means that we can learn a lot about a political regime just by closely observing what it builds, right?
Right.
Vail directly connects to the Beaux-Arts styles. The reason why Beaux-Arts style was used a lot within Canada was because it had a symbolic association with prosperity, civilization, and progress.
And what's interesting is that Alberta was actually trying to get away from its fur trade past. Vail writes that a future-focused province like Alberta used the Beaux-Arts to send a message of Alberta's modernity, authority, and superiority over the past. And you know what's funny? When the legislature was being built, politicians were bragging about this change. And if you guys want an actual quote from the actual person, here you go.
With a degree of pride and pleasure that we note the changed conditions from a fur trader's life to a prosperous modern civilization, we are aiming to establish for our people the most important and imposing structure in the province.
Yes, Dina, that's what they said. Good job.
Kalman was also another researcher who stated that the Beaux-Arts style in Canada was not originally Canadian at all. He said it came to Canada by the way of US and from trained architects through École des Beaux-Arts in Paris.
Yes.
So again, Canadian buildings were copying American ones, and those American buildings were just simply copying Europe.
That's why all the American legislative buildings look the damn same.
You know it.
And I guess if speaking research-based, Kelman has stated again that these relentless classical vocabulary and monumental domes owe their concept to the U.S. Capitol in Washington, and its many derivatives in the state. So when seeing these domes, pillars, and other elements, it should signify authority, stability, and legitimacy.
Guys, I know we're getting annoyed with Americans and them being everyone's business, but the building is not only American-inspired. Kalman showed that there was a large British influence as well. There were arguments that the building was either non-British in feeling or that it matched Anglo-classic or imperial style, which was known to have a distinctive national character.
So what I'm getting here is that Alberta is being smart and using American stylization while still showing their loyalty to Britain and the Empire.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, everything is about power and to prove who is stronger, and the best way to start is to show the political legislative building. Strong government equals strong country.
And scene.
Well, I hope you guys learned a lot from the legislator.
Yeah, I love to talk to you guys. I had so much fun teaching you all. Thank you for listening. If you guys want to meet us, we'll be available for a meet and greet on Wednesdays and Fridays at 3:30 in Daniela Zutik's classroom.
Oh no, Dina, please.
We
Dina,
love you
stop.
all. I'm not
Dina,
going
not
to
again.
change my accent.
Stop.
I love my accent. You're not going to take it away from me, Saren.
Okay, period. Honestly, yeah, why would I take that away?
But thank you all. Goodbye.
Hope you guys enjoyed.
Toodaloo.
Ta-ta.
Bye.